During China's Three Kingdoms period, there's one name that was always mentioned right alongside the legendary Zhuge Liang. Not the sleeping dragon, but the fledgling phoenix, the strategist Pang Tong. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this incredible figure and find the real man behind the myth.
Just listen to this famous saying from the era. Sleeping dragon and fledgling phoenix. Get but one and you can pacify the realm. Now one of those is Zhuge Liang, a household name, but the other is Pang Tong. What that's saying is that either one of these guys was a strategic genius so brilliant they could win you the entire empire.
But here's the thing. While pretty much everyone knows Zhuge Liang's story, Pang Tong is way more of a mystery. He's this fascinating figure whose actual history has been completely overshadowed by this amazing tragic legend. So, let's see if we can separate the facts from the fiction.
All right, let's dive right in. Because to really get Pang Tong, you have to understand that there are basically two versions of him. There's the guy who actually lived, and then there's the character that was written into legend. And they are not the same person. And wow, this really lays it all out, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the historical records which paint a picture of a plain-looking, kind of blunt guy who was a total pragmatist, always focused on the big picture. But then, on the right, you have the famous novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and it completely transforms him. Suddenly, he's arrogant, ugly, and super jealous of Zhuge Liang. I mean, these two descriptions could not be more different.
So where did that incredible nickname, Fledgling Phoenix, even come from? Well, it was given to him by a guy named Sima Hui, who was basically the ultimate talent scout of his day. This was the same man who called Zhuge Liang the sleeping dragon. So getting a title from Sima Hui, that was like getting the ultimate seal of approval from the most respected mind of the generation.
So how did he pull that off? Well, the story goes that at first, nobody really gave Pang Tong the time of day because he just looked so ordinary. But when he finally got to meet Sima Hui, they talked and debated strategy from morning till night. And by the end, Sima Hui wasn't just impressed, he was blown away. He called Pang Tong the crown of scholars in the whole province. Just like that, his reputation was made.
Okay, so he's got this massive reputation, but what did he actually do? Let's take a look at his career and see how he went from being a bored small-time official to one of the most important planners of the entire war. This next story just perfectly captures his whole personality. See, after he joined the warlord Liu Bei, they gave him this tiny, mind-numbingly boring job as a county magistrate, and he just completely ignored it. This was a guy who thought in terms of grand strategy, and he just had no time for day-to-day paperwork.
And you guessed it, there are two versions of what happened next. The real story is that he was about to get fired until Zhuge Liang himself wrote a letter to their boss, basically saying, hey, you're using a cannon to shoot a mosquito. This guy is meant to advise a kingdom, not run a tiny county. The legend, of course, is way more dramatic. In that version, he proves his genius by clearing months of backlog work in a single afternoon, just to save his own skin. So that Leiyang incident definitely got him noticed, but his real masterpiece, the thing he's remembered for in the history books, was still to come. His single greatest contribution was planning the entire campaign that would finally give his lord a kingdom and create the state of Shuha. And this is where you really see his genius shine. He didn't just give one idea. He laid out a full risk analysis. You had the upper plan, a huge all-or-nothing gamble. The lower plan, the safe, cautious retreat. And then the middle plan, a perfectly balanced approach, using a bit of trickery and a bit of force. This is a true grand strategist at work, folks. Now, Liu Bei was always a pretty careful leader, so he went with the middle plan. And guess what? It worked. Perfectly. The entire conquest of the province, the very foundation of his kingdom, followed the exact blueprint that Pang Tong laid out from the very beginning. But that strategic mind was also pretty ruthless. At one point, he flat out told Liu Bei to just assassinate the enemy warlord during a dinner party and end the war right then and there. Liu Bei, who was all about his benevolent image, was completely horrified and refused. Pang Tong was a pure pragmatist. Why let thousands die in a long war when one, let's say, morally gray decision could get the job done?
And that brings us to his final act. This is the moment where the man really ends and the myth truly begins. His death is by far the most famous part of his story, and it's where history and legend just smash right into each other.
So you have two completely different endings to his life. On one side, the historical truth, a tragic but pretty common death in the heat of battle. And on the other, you have one of the most incredible tragedies in all of literature,
a story where every single detail points toward an unavoidable epic doom.
Okay, just listen to the legend, because it's an amazing piece of storytelling. First, his rival Zhuge Liang sees a bad omen in the stars and sends a warning, but Pang Tong just scoffs at it, full of pride. Then, worried about his lord's safety, he swaps horses, taking a famously unlucky steed for himself. The enemy, of course, sees that special horse, thinks it's Liu Bei, and springs the ambush. And the final, poetic twist, the place where he's killed is literally named Fallen Phoenix Slope. The fledgling phoenix dies at Fallen Phoenix Slope. You can't make this stuff up.
Except, they did make it up. The reality is much, much simpler, and in its own way, almost more tragic.
There was no omen, there was no horse swap, no gorge with a prophetic name. The simple truth is, while leading a charge on a fortress, Pang Tong was hit by a stray arrow and he died. It was random, it was brutal, and it was a common way for a commander on the front lines to go. Just a brilliant mind snuffed out by a moment of pure chance.
He was only 35 years old. 35! His whole time as Liu Bei's top strategist had only been about 4 years. You just have to wonder what he could have become.
So, that leaves a huge question, right? If the truth is that simple, why did this incredible, elaborate, and fatalistic legend become the version of the story that everyone knows and remembers?
This chart just sums it all up. The real Pang Tong was a pragmatic strategist killed by the randomness of war. The fictional Pang Tong was an arrogant genius killed by fate and his own jealousy. See, the novel needed a character whose downfall was his own pride.
And this is the real key. The fictional death of Pang Tong, it's not actually about him. It's about Zhuge Liang. By making Pang Tong ignore his rival's warning and then die because of it, the story cements Zhuge Liang as the one true, infallible genius of the age. Pang Tong's fictional arrogance is just a tool to make his rivals seem even wiser.
So it all leaves us with one final thought. The historical Pang Tong was a brilliant man whose life was cut short by the brutal chaos of war. The legendary Pang Tong was a flawed hero whose death was filled with meaning and poetry and purpose. It really makes you wonder, when we look back at history, are we really searching for the complicated truth, or are we just looking for a better story?